Hey folks, welcome back to Game, the Generative AI News Rundown. We're here every week, usually at 12 noon Eastern Time. Today we're an hour earlier because, hey, there's so much news, we have to start earlier. It will be about the same length. We're not going to double the length of the show. But what we do here every week is we talk about the top generative AI news, put it in context, tell you things you probably don't know, and share resources that help you learn more. And I'm Brett Kinsella, founder of Voicebot.ai and Synthedia, and my co-host is the head writer of Voicebot.ai, Eric Schwartz.
Hey, looking forward to this.
I'm looking forward to this as well. All right. We already have people like talking. Hey, Marina, thanks a lot for being here. Yes, we are excited to be here. We have a lot of things to talk about today, a lot of news. We're also going to talk about a special event next week. We've been announcing speakers for Synthedia 3, but I'll hold that off for just a couple minutes. I think people are really going to like that. Andrew, maybe you could put the bit.ly Synthedia 3 link in the chat. So if you are out there, if you're on LinkedIn, if you're on YouTube, just let us know that you're here and make comments, ask questions. We'll incorporate you into the show. We definitely want you to do that. Okay. So what we should do is we should get to the news. We should get started. And hey, Bali, hey, Joel, great to see you. Glad everybody figured this out. Like we're an hour early and we'd only told people 30 minutes ago. So people are on top of this, and I love it that we have the live audience as well as being able to share the recording afterwards. All right, so we have a lot of things that we're going to talk about today. EU Act is one of the key ones. We have new solutions from Vimeo and Meta. We're going to talk about funding rounds, one of which we didn't get to last week, which is a big one. Plus, we've got some enterprises, Mercedes, big company, and Gannett, one of the maybe the largest publisher in the US, I think, of independent news they are. So a lot to cover today. Really excited about this. Malika, hey, I haven't seen you in a long time. We need to catch up. It's been, I think it's over a year now. It's the last time we chatted. So great to see you here in the audience today. Okay, so the first thing we want to hit on is the EU AI Act. Now, this actually happened last week that it got voted out through the parliament. And this is the regulatory framework they're going to use for the EU. And what we have is the next step is the Trilogue Commission, which is 3 governmental bodies in Europe are going to come together and they're going to hash out the details because they all have slightly different versions of this final act. And they are moving towards getting this done by the end of the year. So the earliest that this would actually impact companies is 2024, but there might be a lead-in period and things like that. So who knows? It might be 2024, 2025 once all these things get sorted out. But it is very important what they've been doing. And just to, I will let Eric weigh in here in just a moment, but I did want to bring up another slide here. And MIT Technology Review did a really nice write-up. So what are the key elements of this? So think about the EU and GDPR. They essentially became the regulator of online content around the world because they had a very comprehensive and fairly strict solution. And this is what's going on with the EU AI Act. They're going to be the first major market to actually have a comprehensive solution. So a couple things that MIT Technology Review tells us about this: ban on emotion recognition AI. So being able to determine how you feel and how you react to different things that are shown to you online. Ban on real-time biometrics and predictive policing in public spaces. I think people are familiar with that. ban on social scoring. Obviously, this is something that does happen in China. There's a big program around that. The EU has decided that that's not something that's that they want to have anybody doing in their market. New restrictions on generative AI. Now, there's also this new restrictions on algorithms for social media, but this is what we're here to talk about today. And you can see some of the things in here. This is the draft, the first way to propose to regulate generative AI and ban the use of any copyrighted material in the training set of large language models like OpenAI's GPT-4. OpenAI has already come under scrutiny with regulators, but there are a lot more elements here that we can talk about. And that's just the setup. So we think about what it's going to be. It sets out what the obligations are of the different companies who are operating in the space. And one of them is copyright. What are your thoughts on this, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it's impressively comprehensive, especially because EU laws take a very long time to happen. This has been in the works for more than a year, but the explosion of generative AI led to a pretty quick expansion of what it's doing. And I think it's, as you said, like GDPR, the potential for affecting global technology with the EU, because it's the third largest economy in the world, it's pretty high. So it's not surprising that there's a rush on the side of the tech companies to try to either get ahead or to carve out space for what they want to do. I think as with GDPR and with other tech regulations, I think the EU is going to be pretty stubborn about this. I mean, Italy did actually ban ChatGPT for a little bit, so they're not bluffing in when they say either conform to our rules or we'll kick you out.
Absolutely. Okay, and so they're serious about this, but it's really comprehensive. This is what I just mentioned, and thankfully, our friends at Stanford, the Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Group, they actually did an analysis of this for us, which is great. We appreciate that they did that. And what they did is they looked at 10 leading foundation models. These are not all large language models. There is one, Stable Diffusion, which is actually a text-to-image model. The rest of them are large language models. But a foundation model is the core model that's going to either generate images, videos, or large language models. And they did this really fancy chart, which is fun to look through. And it scored them. And it's basically what they did is they looked at the EU Act. They identified 22 different requirements in there that AI companies would have to comply with. They were able to score 12 of them. So there's 10 that they didn't even look at, but there were 12 that they did. And they said, okay, well, let's look at what's available information about these foundation models, and let's see how well they comply. So that's a 5-point scale. So if there's no dots, that's a 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So it could have a maximum of 4. So the maximum of 48 points scored. Now, some of the models in here you can see by OpenAI, Cohere, Stability, Anthropic, Google, Hugging Face, Meta, AI21Labs, Aleph Alpha, and Eleuther. And they have the model names are under that. You can see that they have focused on these 12 areas of requirements, and those fall into 4 categories: data, compute, model, and deployment. And that's going to be very important in a moment. So if you're listening to this afterwards, you're not watching online, we are actually showing a couple charts here, which you might be interested in checking out. So just go to voicebot.ai, or excuse me, go to youtube.com/voicebot.ai, and you'll be able to see this. Okay. So what we have on the screen right now is how these models stack up. Now, we just showed that like big grid, which provides a lot of information in a very concise format, which is great. But it makes it harder to see some things. And so we created this other chart, which shows each of the models in order for how well they are going to comply with the EU AI Act. And we have the most compliant, 36 out of a potential score of 48, is Bloom. And then GPT Neo X, that's Eleuther AI's one of their models. Palm 2 is the third at 27. That's from Google. GPT-4 from OpenAI. Most people will know that, 25. And then down the road to Jurassic from AI21, Claude from Anthropic, and Luminous from Aleph Alpha, all of which scored under 10 out of 48. Okay. So I wanted to give you that sense. But there's another element here that I think everybody's overlooking, including the Stanford researchers, is that If you don't score a 4, their top score for a requirement within the act, you're actually out of compliance, because legal compliance is generally binary. So, 75% of the way there, still not compliant. So that's one of the things that we were looking at. And what we found is Bloom was compliant in 5 of the 12 categories they scored, but that's 5 of 22 categories, right? And so they're fully compliant. GPT Neo is at 4, and then Palm 3, GPT 4 2. Okay, so we see this goes down. Interestingly enough, something like Stable Diffusion V2 is fully compliant in 4. So it looks like overall they have a lower score, but actually in full compliance they're a little bit higher. Llama, scores 3 in terms of fully compliant, 21 out of 48 in terms of the scoring. Okay, so that's a lot of data. What does this tell us? First of all, this tells us that nobody's close to compliance. So that's the first thing I want everybody to know. And if they're 3 out of 4, 2 out of 4, it just means that for that particular requirement, they might have a little bit less work to do than somebody else. But there's no differentiation in how hard it is to comply with these different requirements. And if we think about there's some requirements that going from a 3 to a 4 might be a lot more work than going from a 0 to a 4. So that's the other thing we want to think about. The 36 out of 48 for Bloom is really optimistic. They're not 75% client. They're not even, they're probably less than half compliant with this. And so all these companies are going to have to do a lot. And there's one more nuance here that I want to talk about. I'm going deep on this because I think it's a really important point when we think about regulation, how these companies are going to have to react. If you look at the different types of requirements, they're mostly about transparency. And the open source models are actually very good with that. And so that's why you'll see the first 2 in the list, actually the most compliant, are open source models. And then Stable Diffusion is pretty good as well, because they have transparency, because they tell you about their model. And that's required for the way people use them, but it's also helpful in terms of their approach in the market. The proprietary models are not as good at that. There's another type of requirement, which is actually around deployment and the operation of large language models. The proprietary companies are actually really good. Palm, OpenAI, Cohere, Anthropic. They're actually pretty good on that, because they don't let just anybody use their models. They know where their models are being used. They can assert some control. And so they're actually much better in compliance on that front. In fact, like Google with Palm actually stands out as being very compliant in all the control functions. The open source companies are going to have a hard time with that. Now, if they're running their own model, okay, they have control and they have transparency. But if someone else is using their model, it's not clear right now what their liability is for them putting out in the world this tool that other people are then using in non-compliance, and what that might mean from a regulatory standpoint. So I just said a lot, and we're trying to actually get through today pretty quickly. But I wanted to break this down because it is so complex and it's going to be so important over the next year. And we just have some really good information to start with. So Eric, what's your initial reaction?
It's so amazing to me, not only how different, I mean, you look at these kinds of models and you think, oh, well, they're all going to operate pretty much the same, but the differences in terms of what they're good at, what they're not so good at, where they're strong and weak is so varied that it really puts to the idea that there's just going to be one model that everyone uses. And I think referencing what we were talking about before with the EU, I think it does give a lot of scope for flexibility in terms of how they operate so that they can still perform at the level that they are trying to reach. But at the same time, these are impressive models now. They're already, you see the number 2 on a lot of these, or number 4. There's already going to be new models coming out this year, next year, that are going to put these to shame. So I think we're looking at a really strong starting point, definitely not the end point.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple other points. So first of all, Malika just said that the ban on use of copyrighted material is really important, because most of those models were trained on some version of internet data, of which there is copyrighted data that's published. And so that was used in there. And there are requirements around disclosure, trying to avoid that. There's a lot of companies that are trying to do something about that right now. anybody who has already trained a model is going to have to deal with that, potential uncertainty. And this uncertainty I think is really an important element. If you look at the open source models, if they can't comply with some of the requirements because someone else is using their tools that they created, this could really hit them hard in valuation. Could bring their valuations down because they can't do the control part. It could make it hard for them to get people to sign up because they have this specter of potential regulatory oversight on them. So this is going to be really important for people to get work. And on the other side, we have the bigger companies who do not want to give away proprietary information, which helps differentiate their model performance from others. So and what we found is there used to be a lot more disclosure in some of these models. Google never really gave any disclosure, but OpenAI was giving a lot of disclosure. Some of the other companies were telling you more about maybe not all the weights, but model weights, but like a lot of information, like how many data tokens. They've all pulled back from that because they think that the type of data you use, how you train it, how you curate it is a competitive differentiator.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning, certainly a lot of the initial data and almost definitely still a lot is still being labeled and tagged by humans before it's integrated into these models. So this may become another element in that process, which is often done for not a lot of money. So it may become a more in-demand skill to be able to tell the difference between a copyrighted image and a non-copyrighted image.
Yes. Oh, we might talk about some things related to this a little bit later. We've covered that on this show. Remember, Nina Schick was our guest about 2 months ago, and we talked about this idea of basically some sort of provenance chain. So EU AI Act, very important to keep track of what's going on because it's going to impact how the companies operate over the next year. And you're going to actually be able to predict based on this what some of these companies are going to do in terms of features, in terms of lockdown information, in terms of what they share. And not surprisingly, OpenAI is now a very big lobbyist, or have a very big lobbying campaign. The first thing they did was send Sam Altman out around the world to meet with government leaders and talk. And, there's an article in Time about how they were trying to water down the EU AI Act and try to get the foundation models not covered under the high risk area, which I think actually partially happened, which is really important. That's like for another day. We can go into that level of detail. But they're going to wind up becoming one of the biggest lobbyists out there because although all that money they took in, those billions of dollars, they just took in another 300 million last month after the 10 billion from Microsoft, right? Some of that's going to go to lobbying because how they navigate this is going to be critical because they want to be a global company and they're not going to give up access to the third largest economy in the world.
Yeah, it's the digital enforcer, as he calls it, is currently in Silicon Valley meeting with not only Sam Altman but also Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg to talk about exactly this kind of thing and sort of hash out some potential regulatory framework for the future in the EU. So it's going to be interesting.
All right, so that's enough for the EU. What I do want to do is I want to bring up some other information. And so everybody who's here is probably already registered, but there's people who are going to be watching afterwards. And if you're not, I want to tell you a little bit more about Synthedia 3. So Synthedia 3, this is our generative AI innovation showcase. And one of the things we do is we have the Synthedia newsletter, which many of you are subscribed to. If you're not, Andrew will put a link in the chat so you can see that. That's daily news. It's like commentary, context analysis of top generative AI news stories and trends every day sent to your email inbox. And so that was the idea behind Synthedia, to complement what we're doing, which is more news oriented in voicebot.ai. But we've actually run a couple of these Synthedia conferences, and they're super popular because it's so important to be able to see the solutions in action and to be able to hear from the people that are creating these. And so that's why we call it the Innovation Showcase, because all these people are going to do demos. They're going to show you things they haven't shown before. Some of them are going to debut things that aren't even public products because they see the Synthedia audience is sophisticated and wanted to see these types of things. So just a couple of folks that are going to join us. Aravind Srinivas doesn't really talk a lot. He's the CEO of Perplexity. I've done a couple videos on the Perplexity AI solution. It is better than Google SGE. It's better than Bard. It's better than Bing Chat. I've got some other data on that. I showed some data last week, but I've got some more that's coming out in the next couple of days. He's going to talk about what they're trying to do in the market, what they're learning, and they're learning a lot. They just launched a pro version. It's pretty amazing. And if you don't know this, Aravind, is a former researcher and OpenAI team. So he's got this like particular background. Tobias Tangle from Willow Tree, they're doing work with some big companies implementing generative AI systems. Omar Tawakkol from Rembrandt, product placement. Yasmina Benkouy's with NVIDIA. It's like animating avatars, non-player character avatars, like animating them so that you can be conversational solutions. Bill Rogers in healthcare, Dylan Richardson in a voice AI marketplace or a synthetic voice marketplace. Mick Gupta is going to talk about deepfake detection. Greg Cross from Soul Machines. Veritone's going to be here as well. They just, we don't have them on here yet because they just, we just got the details done with them. But Veritone's going to be talking about some amazing things they're doing with synthetic voices in the media industry. And it's happening out there. You're being exposed to this. You don't even know. And we have a couple other folks as well. So I hope you can join us. It's really going to be fun. I've seen some of the things that they're going to show, and I just want to encourage people to check that out. And so you can see in the chat that it's bit.ly/Synthedia, the number 3. Okay, enough on that, but I did want to make sure that everybody was aware of it. And I think what we want to do now is we want to go into another session. So we've got our featured story, which we did. Now we're going to go into all of the funding rounds. And I call it the money fountain section because every week we have these types of things and we just sort of talk about them. But now it's going to be a package. So it's going to be a recurring thing. And Eric, I think you should start off talking about Mistral because that happened last week, but we didn't get to it. And it's a big number.
Yeah, it's 113 million. It's one of, if not the largest funding round for a French tech startup. And it's an interesting group because it's people from, as with a lot of these startups, it's people from Meta, from Google DeepMind, who were working in AI and who decided to strike out on their own and work on generative AI as the space has started to really explode. So they're pushing instead of as we've been discussing, instead of the proprietary approach, they're going for an open source model, open source large language models, and building tools from those models that they can then offer to businesses. So the idea being that instead of the value of their product being the actual LLM, it's how they use it, how they leverage it to create useful business tools, which is also, as we'll discuss, a very big theme recently and probably going forward. And it's, as I said, they have some impressive resumes. They're drawing in a lot of big investors from Lightspeed partners, and they're really looking toward not only the business market, but also, as we've been saying, the EU is its own environment, and people who work there and have been immersed in that regulatory space are probably going to have an easier time of navigating the current and future regulatory space. So it's a lot of money for a lot of potential.
Yeah, and I think being European, yes, maybe they'll have an advantage. At least they're starting now and they know what the new rules are going to be. So it'll be easier to start for them. But I think that it's going to be harder for companies now. If you're a big company already, complying with new rules is something that you actually have resources to do or to address. If you're a new company starting out, it's a little bit harder. And I brought up another story here, which is our second in the Money Fountain segment. And this is another European company. ElevenLabs raised 19 million. They also released a deep-face voice detector, but they're known for synthetic voice clones.
Yeah, almost infamous might be the word, because when they launched their beta platform in January, it was genuinely very impressive and didn't really require much in the way of recordings. So because they hadn't perhaps reckoned with what the internet would do with that kind of technology, there wasn't enough in the way of guardrails or limits on who could use it. So immediately, deepfake videos and audio using their technology in ways that theoretically you're not supposed to use it started popping up, and they had to clamp down on that. But it also did demonstrate just how effective their technology is. So yeah, they went from a 2 million round at the beginning of the year to 19 million now, and a lot of interest from, again, talking about big names, Andreessen Horowitz, a couple of big venture capitalists. It's going to be a very exciting rest of the year for ElevenLabs.
Well, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but there's a thunderstorm going on outside my studio, and I have a pretty good mic, so you didn't hear it. But the thunder cracked just when he said they didn't have enough guardrails to protect against misuse. So it was like the natural soundtrack of the world. I always love it when that happens. So a couple things about this. So they announced they raised 19 million. They also announced this deepfake detection tool. So my hypothesis is that they think that the deepfake detection tool is a much larger market, or is giving a much higher valuation, because we've seen synthetic voice companies come and go. Most of them have not been able to command really high valuations. We're talking about like one of the most successful ones got bought for about 30 million. And that was sort of like an inside transaction type of thing. So who knows what that meant. Most of them have not been able to command that type of return. If you're raising 19 million, I'm assuming they have at least a 38 million, probably something north of 60 million in terms of valuation. And it's hard to look at the synthetic voice market, as competitive as it is, and as little revenues we've seen flow through that, is that I think they're thinking that there's this bigger market around not just the voices, but also the deepfake detection. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that having shown that they are capable of producing very good deepfake voices, now they want to show that it's not a dangerous or uncontrollable technology. So now they need to be able to say, oh, but if you use our technology, we can always tell. So there's no way that it would be going out in the wild without any sort of method of determining when it happens. And I think it's telling that some of the other investors on who weren't leading it include people from DeepMind and Inflection, from Runway, the deepfake video company, from Perplexity. It's these companies that want voice and are a little concerned about how to embed it within their own technology. So a company that can say, we can synthesize voice and make sure that there's always a authenticity check on it, is going to be very appealing.
Yeah, and I think that really great idea. They're doing the watermarking. They're being responsible citizens, and it could just be that. But one of the things we try to do is we try to triangulate all the different data points. And when I look at that valuation and where they are, yes, they're anointed as the next great company in the space, but there are a lot of companies already in the space with a lot of track record, very good technology. So it could be that this market is just exploding right now and it's gone vertical, and it doesn't matter. There's a lot of competitors. ElevenLabs is going to sort of jump out in front. It could be that they just feel they need a war chest to wrap this whole market up, and maybe they'll start doing acquisitions. So I could see that potentially happening. But I also just have this sense that maybe they think that deepfake detection could go beyond just the watermarking and identification of their own solutions, beyond just being good citizens with their own product, but maybe being able to apply it to others. It's not clear to me that they have the capability to do that. But if I look at the valuation, the early valuation of this, that's what immediately comes to mind for me. So we'll leave it at that on that one. But before I do our last money fountain item, another European startup, like amazing. Just in case you just joined, this is GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week on Thursdays, usually at 12 noon Eastern. Today, we're an hour earlier. And you can watch these shows afterwards on YouTube, and LinkedIn. Most of you are probably doing that. If you're here, please let us know in the chat, if you haven't already, that you're here. Ask questions, make comments. We always incorporate those in. And if you do me a favor, so if you're in YouTube, if you could just like it right now, like the video. If you're in LinkedIn, like the post that we have. But if you wouldn't mind, actually click through, go over to Voicebox YouTube channel and like this episode. Just go in there, you hit the Voicebox YouTube channel, hit the live pane, and hit like for this video. We'd really appreciate it. That really helps. And if you haven't subscribed, you should. So maybe Andrew, you can put the YouTube link for the channel in there. All right. So let us know if you're here. Make comments. It's all welcome. We like to incorporate everybody in the community into this discussion. That's what we really think this is. It's a community discussion. Money fountain. Story number 3. Another European company. How often have we talked about European companies at all in fundraising? We certainly have, but not as often as US-based companies, sometimes other places in the world. But have we ever had 3 European companies on at the same time?
I don't recall that happening, but it's it's telling, I think, that there's this both a demand and a talent well in Europe for exactly this kind of technology. So I think, and I don't think that's going to be going away. So it's not surprising to see Synthesia, which has been around, I mean, not very long, but a little bit longer than some of the others we've been talking about. And they're going in the, they expanded out of the idea of a virtual human, of video, synthetic videos with virtual humans hosting it, and have now raised a lot of money to really boost that technology and really expand, especially in the, the enterprise space. There's the appeal of being able to write out a description of a video and then have not only a script, but also the host, the background, and the audio all done for you relatively quickly is not going to is definitely going to attract a lot of companies who need to put out content or need training videos or any kind of video content like this. And so $90 million is going to boost that 12 million video count quite a lot, I think.
Absolutely. And I think this just is another indicator that Synthesia got out early in front and had a business model and solution that they were able to drive a lot of adoption early. And I think this just solidifies the fact that they are the leader in this space right now for the type of video they do. It's mostly training, education videos, some news solutions. It's a model that I know some other companies have started to adopt. Now, there are some interesting announcements coming out next week that we know about, which can't really talk about in this space, which I think you should wait for. End of next week, you'll see some very interesting things. But this marker suggests that there's a lot of growth there too, because Synthesia already had a number of customers, which means they already had a bit of revenue, and they had 5x growth last year. So, I think that that with this funding round and the $1 billion valuation. So a unicorn in the virtual AI avatar, synthetic virtual human video space. I've got another term that I use for this now because I was like, oh, there's too many terms. But this is something that's very important. And I think it's really good news for the other players in the space, because basically they're showing that this market can be successful even if they don't have a ton of traction yet. But what I am seeing as well is the rise of interest in large language models and interactive solutions is driving more interest in this space than it was. And it's actually expanding to more folks. We've got Greg Cross from Soul Machines is going to be at Synthedia next week. He's going to talk about this very issue, and they do high-end stuff that is like enterprise ready, multi-channel, all these types. It's a lot more sophisticated than what Synthesia is doing. But I think overall you can just see that this market is finally moving, and we've been covering this since at least 2020.
Yeah, and it's notable because it's not just from scratch creating images and videos. It's the idea that you can integrate the technology into existing synthetic media platforms and enhance it enormously from that starting point, and so therefore making it possible for existing companies like Synthesia to leverage the new technology rather than having to start over from the beginning with a brand new platform.
Absolutely. Hey, shout out to Saeed Bashan. Says, hi, everyone. Love to connect with you all. And that's one of the things we like to do is help create connections in this space, because there's a lot of us who are working in the generative AI space. We come from different technology categories very often, different types of companies. And Gain and the Synthedia newsletter and the Synthedia event, those are designed to bring people together. So I'm glad you're able to do that. Shout out, Seed. People should definitely try to connect with him on LinkedIn and tell them you saw him on Gain. You saw his comment on Gain. All right. So we also have the link to the YouTube channel up there in case anybody needs it. Next thing, we're now going to get into product garden. All right. So money is the fountain. It's the water. What comes out of that money? Products, and they grow. And Observe AI has a new solution, a new LLM with 30 billion parameters. So small compared to the really large ones, but still significant and their own. Yeah,
and it was funny, as you mentioned earlier, it's almost surprised to see, oh, they're actually mentioning how big it is rather than just leaving it blank and suggesting that it's enormous. So that was a little bit of
I think only OpenAI has that luxury, really, or maybe
true.
a couple other people. But like, and with them, they didn't tell you the data set or the parameter size. NVIDIA, I think in their latest one, told us the data set size, but not the number. Well, no, they did tell us number. They told us both, actually.
Yeah. Well, they can afford to. They're so far ahead in other ways.
Oh, there's this other thing too. You got to remind me for next week. There's this whole breakdown of all the money in the market, or like all the revenue in the market, and it's like almost $40 billion in generative AI this year. And if you look at it, almost all of it is going to cloud hosting providers in NVIDIA. It's like 98% of it. And then there's this like little line item for software that's going to flip in a few years, where it's going to come down to like 25 to 35% for the existing things. But so we'll save that for next week. We'll talk about the economics of this space, but it's really fascinating. So I think Observe is really interesting. And if we think about what they're doing, why do you think it's important that they have their own model? And I don't recall, did they say which foundation model they built it on?
No, they didn't say what they used to build it. They implied at least that it was entirely built in-house using their own data scientists and their own data sets. In fact, well, definitely with their own data sets, because the whole point of their LLM is that it's a contact center LLM trained on customer service interactions, trained for both handling interactions with customers and helping human agents with their working at contact centers to assist customers. So it's this idea of a sort of domain-specific LLM, and we've seen domain-specific products before. OpenAI and Google certainly are interested in doing that, but those tend to be fine-tuned models based on existing, OpenAI's GPT 3.5 Turbo or GPT-4, and then trained and fine-tuned. But this is starting from the ground up, a contact center focused LLM, and that's according to Observe AI, a major enhancer of the service, because it helps get rid of some of the issues like hallucinations, and it helps speed things up in terms of pulling the correct information from the LLM itself. I think those seem like fairly obvious benefits, so it's not surprised that they're working on it. And they've been flush with cash for a while now, pulling in huge rounds for the last few years. So they're clearly on the upswing for being able to get ahead in this technology, and coming to their clients and future clients and saying, hey, you don't actually have to use what is ultimately a Microsoft product or a Google product. You can actually have a relationship with us who's very focused on just this service, and make sure that you have both the most advanced technology and the kind of specifications and specificity of the service that you're looking for.
Absolutely. And what I should do is I should actually say that if you didn't see the Model Mania event that we put on a couple of months ago, people are watching, we had Gannett AI, NLX, both demoed solutions that address this in terms of hallucinations. And Gannett AI actually presented a lot of data around standard models, general purpose models, their own model, customized models, and then customized models with what they call a truth checker. And they're able to reduce the impact of hallucinations from around 14%, which is right around what you would normally get from an OpenAI model, down to less than 1%. And I think they're less than 0.5% in their latest iteration, which came out after that. So if anybody wants to see those, they're really fascinating, because they do demos. This is what we like. We really focus on this idea of people doing demos. And this was the Model Mania was AI models and enterprise conversational AI. So it was like a specific use case, mostly contact center focus. And there's some really good information there. So you guys can find that at our YouTube channel, which is on the screen now. And just look for the Model Mania playlist underneath that, and you'll be able to see all those folks. So really fascinating stuff in there. And along those lines, I'll just bring this up. NLX, you did a story about this. I think you broke the news that they have, some new solutions out in this space that they formally announced.
Yeah, and again, it's this idea of a narrowly focused product, but also giving their customers the sort of support of an existing platform rather than relying on starting from scratch to build a conversation. It essentially is making the generative AI a writing assistant for what people were doing in Dialogflow and creating these chatbots. So it makes it so instead of staring at a blank page, you describe what kind of conversation you want your chatbot to have, and it will help you build that and come up with ways to respond to customers. And it's instead a variation on the idea of a writing assistant for all kinds of business practices, but one that I think will be especially useful when it comes to giving people that AI interactive element of customer service that's become pretty common now, while also maintaining control over how the AI actually responds to what people are selling it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of the things that they announced this week, or that you found and put out there for them, they actually debuted 2 months ago at Model Media. So like, if you want to see actually how that works, because like you may have just heard the music start up because the video started to auto play, so they have the short video which shows what the solution is, and you should check that out. But if you want to see more depth of that, like how it all works, the founder, Andre Papancha, who I've known for a number of years, he actually cracked open, did a live demo with the software, showed how it worked, showed how it could like understand who I was, showed how they could tie in different models together. It's like really fascinating. So I'm really excited about the innovation in that space. All the companies in that space, VoiceFlow showed some very interesting things as well around particularly these enterprise applications, because those are taking off, and you might not see headlines about it, but I'm talking to people every day. I've got a group of contact center executives who are going to be on a Zoom with me. Got a dozen of them. We're meeting together this afternoon to talk about what's going on in the space. So I'm really excited about what's happening there. Now, another thing that got me excited is maybe a little bit closer to home. And unfortunately, the screen froze there for just a second, but those of you who are listening won't care, is Vimeo. So they've introduced some generative AI tools for video. And I did a pretty extensive breakdown on this because it seems like sort of plain vanilla. And it almost seems like, oh, you just have 3 features: AI-powered script generator, teleprompter, and text-based video editor. It's like, oh, that doesn't seem very impressive. You're not changing the world. And then I looked at it, I'm like, oh, those are for each stage of the video production process, pre, during recording, and post, those are the tasks that have the biggest impact on how much time it takes to do the video.
Yeah, and not only the time it takes, but also marking a difference between what could look somewhat amateurish and what could be a professional video, even if someone is not professional. I think it's telling that the integration of not only the script writing, but the script writing with the teleprompter and with the editor of the video afterward is trying to make it one flow. They talk about how it should be a one take process. They basically say, oh, you should be able to put it together, your script, film it, and get it out there, with the only lag time being what kind of script you're writing and how much editing you need to make to it. And it's honestly pretty impressive. I was playing around with it a little bit as well, and it does an effective job. And I think these kinds of seemingly vanilla tools aren't necessarily not important. I mean, it's not specifically generative AI, but I do recall that there is a comparatively large amount of chatter over a pretty simple Microsoft AI tool that all it did was change how you looked when you're doing a presentation so that you maintain eye contact, even if you're not maintaining eye contact. And that it seemed to attract a lot of interest, because it's these little things that can make all the difference for, especially if you're an independent or work for a small business. These are the things that matter.
Okay, so I think there's one other point that I want the people of Gain to know. The Synthedia readers maybe saw this already if they looked at the article. I also think that this is very important in relation to our comment about Synthesia. So Synthesia, big funding round, strong growth, looks like there's a lot of adoption of their solution. So that might be just net new. It's things that wouldn't have been videos are now videos. But As people adopt that more, it's going to encroach on people creating videos with live human presenters. So I almost looked at this. Vimeo's had its challenges over the years anyway, like, originally kind of a YouTube competitor and then not, trying to find their way, now being sort of more video production controlled, this environment where, they're really just after enterprise users, much more than creators, for example. Enterprise users are what Synthesia and all of the other Hour1, Soul Machines, DID, all the other players in the market, in the virtual human, virtual presenter, synthetic, avatar, space are in. And so this might be actually pretty important for Vimeo to keep people in the human-centered space and saying, okay, what's the issue? Well, I need a script beforehand to make sure I cover all the key points. Okay, I've got something scriptwriter. Not surprising. Do that with ChatGPT. There's a lot of tools that will help you with that. But just integrating it into their suite will just make it part of a workflow tool, which is nice. Teleprompter. One of the things that happens, particularly when you're trying to do a training video or a product launch video or something like that in corporate communications, you might have to do multiple takes. If you don't have a teleprompter, it's much harder to do that. And if you can, there's other teleprompter tools that you could use, but having it again in your workflow tool, just makes sense. And there's some things that they're integrating with it that'll, make it more valuable than maybe an external one. And then the third thing is that post-production, removing ums and ahs, making it look more polished, and this is one of the things people I'm not going to do a live video of myself because I might forget things or I might look foolish because of the disfluencies. All of a sudden, they're going to make that easier. I think this is really important because it might create the situation, not that just that more people do this, but that some people who are doing it continue to do it and don't switch over to the synthetic avatar videos.
Yeah, and it's hugely important in the business world, but also it feeds down onto the consumer side. I mean, there was a time not that long ago when the idea of a professionally polished image that used software to smooth things out to make it look better, not manually edited, just literally hitting a button, seemed kind of silly and unnecessary. And now it's just sort of how things operate. And I think videos are moving that way as well. So I think, this is going to be how media
it's going to be commonplace. I was just talking to Jaime Bosch. He's going to be on the Voicebox podcast in a couple of weeks. He's one of the founders of VoiceMod. And he's just we were talking about auto-tune. He's like, at one point that was a thing. Oh, they used auto-tune. Isn't that terrible? It's everyone uses auto-tune now. So, some of these things that seem exotic and novel in one era just become commonplace in the next. And I could see that this being, I really like what Vimeo is doing because they're keeping the human in the loop, right? They're making it easier for humans to do these things as opposed to going fully digital. And you're keeping that human, the authenticity, the emotion, the expression that you still really can't get with the synthetic characters. I know they're getting a lot better. Again, we talked about some things that are coming up next week that will talk to that. But so another story out this week. And this is this is 2 or 3 weeks in a row that they've done something interesting. Our friends at Meta came out with Voicebox.
Yes, Voicebox. Only one letter away from VoiceBot. Not saying it's not a coincidence, but just saying it could be that they wanted a different name and had to change a letter. But yes, it's talking as we did before about some of these other companies. These things seem to come in groups, and it wouldn't shock me if Silicon Valley people talk to each other about these kinds of technologies. But Meta's going for the deep fake voices. They're claiming that it's so good that they actually won't release the software behind it. They're only going to demonstrate it and open up opportunities for people to use it. And that's why they have, again, their own deepfake voice detector for their technology. So again, the idea being that you have a product and a safety net around it at the same time, which certainly makes sense. But I don't know if it's really how Meta feels, or if it's a bit of marketing to say that it's just too powerful to unleash in any way. But based on the
doesn't it sound like Google was telling us last year with Lambda, and then all of a sudden Bard, Palm, everything's out. I mean, they're until the competitive juices get flowing, they're saying, hey, we've created this amazing thing, but it's dangerous in other people's hands, so you can't see it. And then obviously the market left them behind. Meta's in a different position because they're actually not trying to sell these types of things. They're using them more in part to sort of keep their technical team interested in staying at
Yeah.
Meta, but also in part because a lot of these things are starting to get incorporated into Meta products.
Yeah, and I mean, it is also kind of funny that a company whose LLM was hacked and leaked to the public is now essentially teasing hackers, saying that this is the most amazing technology, and we're locking it away so no one can see it. I don't think that's what they're trying to do, but there is a way to read it that way.
Yeah, it is really it is really interesting. There is a scenario where Meta actually becomes the most successful company in this space. It's a low probability scenario, but I've sort of game planned it out because certain things that are happening in the market that could actually make it look like a good player. We'll see what their reputational overhead, does. I think it's starting to rebuild a little bit. Particularly with a lot of this AI stuff, people have some goodwill towards it. They've been so good in supporting the academic community. And then like a week ago, it was 2 weeks ago, they just came out with the music generator as well. So they are a full service solution like Google and OpenAI. They're doing everything. Those are really, and I guess NVIDIA too. So those 4 companies are really doing everything.
Yeah, but as with the music generator, keeping everything sort of locked away.
I know. Come on. You put the music out there. All right. So quick shout out to Brian Hendry and Carol Bourgeois, I think. Carol. Great to have you guys here. Thanks for joining us and making some comments as well. We do this every week. Join us at noon Eastern time on LinkedIn and YouTube live. And you can always watch these things afterwards on Voicebox YouTube channel if you miss it one week. But we hope you come live because it is fun. I think I enjoy it. I definitely enjoy it with everybody here. Okay, so two quick stories, and then we're going to do winners and losers of the week and wrap it up. So the first one, hey, this is close to your heart, Eric.
Yeah.
Publisher, you've been a journalist your entire career. USA Today, which is the largest publisher in the US, I believe, has 200 publications. Gannett, so Gannett is the company. USA Today is their flagship product. They selected Cohere, so that's significant because it's not another OpenAI win. It's a Cohere win. It's one of the more prominent ones. And they're going to do generative AI-driven news summaries with humans in the loop.
Yeah, well, they don't want to fall into the trap of a previous news company that tried to use generative AI for news summaries and immediately fell into hallucinations causing real problems for them. So
a media company? I think you mean several media companies.
That's true.
I think I stopped at 3 examples in that Synthedia post.
Yeah, it's a real issue. It's what happens when you have people who may not know quite the value of why, the reason there are humans involved in news reporting and not just lists of events. But it's one of those things that you could see it as like, oh, it's great. It frees up resources to give to reporters doing more in-depth things, more complex reporting, long form reporting. Of course, there's also the idea of, well, is this going to be the first step toward it trying to eliminate a newsroom? And unfortunately,
Eric, is it a coincidence that this comes up at the same time that there's a writers or journalist strike?
Well, it's
not a full strike. They've had a couple of like days off, there's like 1 day,
things
like that.
Yeah,
there's a dispute going on. They have an outstanding labor contract that hasn't been resolved.
Yeah, I would say, the Writers Guild of America is on strike, but not all journalists, at least as far as I know. But it is a bit of a flex by, I would say, management in that regard. But it's so USA Today's news summaries have always been deliberately, it's not for bad reason, just deliberately written to be simple, to the point, short. And that is where we've seen ChatGPT and others like it do very well. If there's not enough space for them to start hallucinating or causing problems, that's all for the best. I do think that it's keeping humans in the loop is obviously smart because it will help stop or at least reduce problems of inaccurate information. But I don't think that it's going to. I don't think that's a step toward getting rid of people entirely, just because any brand new information, unless a newspaper only wants to do content aggregation from online forums, there has to be some element of being written. I mean, the whole point is this is trained on what journalists have done. It's not trained on nothing. It's trained on what people do.
It's like Bloomberg GPT. I mean, like it's customized. But I think like the key thing here is editors and fact checkers are going to have new responsibility now, because in the past, at least they had the filter of the journalist trying to get it right the first time and then, trying to fix it afterwards. Now they have the training, the curation, the editing process. As long as the companies that are doing this understand that the editing is going to take more time, fact checking is going to take more time. First of all, it's inevitable. I mean, we saw Sports Illustrated to let a bunch of people go like the day after, or they let a bunch of people go the week after they said they were going to do generative AI, and the day after they had a problem. they announced it. So, okay. So final story, and then winners and losers, and we'll just hit this last one really quickly. But Mercedes has the MBUX, which is their in-car voice assistant, now allows you to say, "Hey, ChatGPT." That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, putting ChatGPT in the car, it's a pilot program, and it's not universal everywhere, but that some Mercedes owners are going to be able to have the power of ChatGPT behind their car voice assistant, so making it possible to have a lot more casual conversation, get more complex information, and really sort of bring all the power of ChatGPT into their car for better or worse. It's going to be, the car space this is the first of its kind of thing, but there's a lot of money in AI for vehicles, and there's a lot of big players in that space. So I don't think this is going to be a simple replacement of everything with ChatGPT.
No, it's an experiment. They're actually doing a service to the auto industry by taking the early arrows in case there's any issues around hallucinations. I think it's really interesting that it's not surprising they're the first ones in the auto industry to do it. It's interesting how quickly they've gotten into it. And that's going to be our transition to winners and losers of the week, because my losers of the week are going to be companies like Soundhound and Alexa Auto, because I think that they have a new competitor in town all of a sudden. And it's not that it's a one-to-one relationship. ChatGPT is not controlling the car. It's not controlling your smart home devices. There's a lot of things it's not doing, but it is actually covering a significant portion of the questions that people might have or could potentially can, which is about the world around them, about the points of interest, about destinations, about news. And if you're thinking about share of attention in the car with your assistant versus other assistants that might be accessible at the same time, this is bad news for them.
Yeah, and Mercedes has a long relationship with Cerence, the voice AI for cars company, and including using their technology for things like what's around you, points of interest, their tour guide AI capability. So, and Cerence is working on generative AI projects as well. So it's going to be a big.
We might even have something coming up with them on this very topic. I think Cerence is actually more insulated from this because they're so important in the car. They've got all the language support. So a lot of this, I think, is going to be supplemental for them, but I think it is really fascinating. Who's your loser for the week?
I'd say my loser for the week is probably the, I'm going to say Marvel, because they're getting some heat right now for using AI art in the credits for their new Secret Invasion TV show. It's not like it was a secret that they were hiding, but they were working with a company for effects that uses AI art, and they used it for some of their scenes in the credits, at least. And there's a lot of pushback from the industry, from artists in general, and it's not a good look for them. They may have all of the money for entertainment right now, but that doesn't mean that they can necessarily get away with everything they want to do.
Okay, so my winner for the week, I'm going to say, is the virtual human video companies. So the AI avatar video companies, and I'm not going to just say Synthesia. Obviously, they had like a big win this week. There's other people who've raised money recently too that have done well. But I think that bringing in the investors that they did, the amount of money that they were able to raise, and what they reported in terms of their success numbers and growth suggests that whole market is actually finally poised for rapid growth.
Yeah, I mean, that seems accurate to me. I mean,
okay. Well, okay, so you agree. Who's your winner for the week?
My winner for the week, well, I mean, going back to the art side, I'm going to go ahead and say Beatles fans, because they're getting one more album thanks to the use of generative AI to enhance the audio of a track that didn't seem usable before. So it's exciting for them to hear something new after all these years.
Awesome. Okay, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for joining us today. We don't forget to join us on Tuesday. You have to register. Go to bit.ly/Synthedia3, Synthedia, the number 3. Join us on Tuesday. We have some great stuff that we're going to be showing. We'll be back here next Thursday with another gain as well. We'll be at 12 noon next week. Really looking forward to doing this. Eric Schwartz, thanks for being here. Everyone else, thanks for being here and commenting. And until next week, keep your eyes peeled. There's going to be some new announcements next week. We've got some insight into them. It'll be pretty interesting. Bye-bye, everyone.